Thank you.
We still have a quorum, so.
Yeah,
That's
we,
where-
this is the September 15th meeting of the Finance and Planning Committee. We do have a quorum, but just barely. I think that's important, just pretty much to approve the meeting minutes, if nothing else.
Is the definition of the quorum for this purpose, is it 51% or more? Okay,
And because I just got approved, I
Yeah.
get to count.
yeah.
Right,
2 hours ago.
that helps. Right.
That recent, huh?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, you approved now.
So I call this meeting to order. I'm going to read the disclaimer statement. Official recordings, videos, transcriptions of the HSVPOA committee meetings and board meetings will be done by authorized personnel only and can be viewed on the HSVPOA YouTube channel and exploretheVillage.com. Any other meetings, video or transcriptions of HSVPOA committee meetings and/or board meetings is not considered the official record of the HSV Property Owners Association meetings and/or board meetings. Okay, with that, first item, review, approve previous minutes. Any comments on the world record production of the meeting minutes?
And will remain a record, by the way,
Yeah.
but
All right, motion to approve. Oh,
Becky had commented, and I think it's a good inclusion, in the 2022 fee schedule, just stating that I put different fees for improved and unimproved, and it should be amenity use fees. So,
motion to approve with the
Correction.
change as suggested by Becky.
second.
Okay, favor?
Aye.
So approved. Review today's agenda. Any comments?
Do we have the things that Jeff had sent out, the preliminary drafts? Are we allowed to discuss that?
It's up to you guys.
I'd like to get that expedited if at all possible. I think it's incredibly important to communications in the future.
I'm
Well,
not prepared to discuss it because it just came out and I've been up to here and so I did get it, but I'm not prepared to discuss it. But like you, I don't think we can diddly-dally on it.
No, it's, I think, very important. It looked to me to be scrutinized carefully by probably people more intelligent than I, but
Although I don't think legally we have any connection with it.
right.
no, it's just kind of advice and
Well,
input,
yeah,
but-
I mean,
And maybe we don't need to discuss it today, but I'd like
Yeah.
to certainly get it on Mondays, if not. Will Jeff be back Monday?
I
Jeff?
fully expect Jeff and Larry to be back Monday.
Okay, maybe it'd be wise to
Yeah.
be here when both of them are here.
And
Okay.
there may be something in there that does relate to us directly that we need to incorporate or.
Theoretically-
I didn't
We
see
need
any.
Jeff and Larry as the
Yeah.
creators of it to help explain.
Theoretically,
Yeah,
yes. There are a few things that might influence today's discussion, but I think our communications were unofficial.
It was just their politeness to us. to
Right. It was a
Close the
courtesy.
loop with us.
It was basically a courtesy. Any other comments about today's agenda? With that, may I have a motion to approve?
so moved.
Okay, second,
Second.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so approved. Before we get down to the agenda, Gary, just had a board meeting, anything of interest for this committee?
Not a thing.
You are incorrect.
That was a setup.
That was a setup, yeah, come on, softball.
Becky and Ford are officially part of the committee.
Okay, great.
Congratulations.
I was trying to remember what else was big on the agenda. It was fairly routine. This
Yeah.
committee did not see the truck issue. If you'll remember last fall, there was a truck proposed for this year to replace one that was 20 years old.
Big old truck.
And $130,000 was allocated. Well, when the bids were solicited, that wouldn't cover it. So at the discussion session at the first of the month, the board saw the bids, the proposals, and today the board adopted the recommended purchase. So
Okay, very good.
that's en route.
We need
Obvious story there is when you want something done, do it, and you know you need it done today, do it today. Because all
Right.
plans that were done or thought about last year are not working out. The sanitation trucks, now they're expecting delivery in January.
Mhm.
What else did we learn?
And if they, I was there too, so I got the agenda. They emphasized how out of sync everything is with the finances today. They're out of sync because you can't get employees, and so that expense is out of sync. They're out of sync because they have authorized and ordered equipment, and that's not coming in, and so therefore it's not showing up on the books. And
We even have a fire truck that's being repaired.
2 months already, and it's not
Delayed.
even ready. Yeah. And John
Yeah.
Paul said that there was a piece of golf equipment they ordered in January that still isn't here, so everything is really weird out of sync as far as trying to keep the finances
Right.
flowing the way finances should be.
Right. Not to beat my own drum, but I'm gonna beat my own drum. If you read all the comments that I made on public utilities, one of them basically said, are there issues with basically fulfillment? You budget for stuff, but you may not be able to actually fulfill the budget. That's not something, I think, for this committee. It's a really interesting observation. It's an issue. You budget for what you want to spend. I don't think that this committee at this time has any oversight or influence over, for lack of a better term, budget fulfillment.
I agree with that, but like you brought
Yeah.
up, it's something that is going on in the
It's an
world,
issue.
our world that we're connected with finance.
Oh,
that We should
absolutely.
be aware of.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, one of my questions for Jason, if we were sitting right there, is, you know, if you get all this money, what are the issues with you
How are you
spending
gonna-
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, basically. And it's personnel, equipment, supplies, all that stuff. But that's a good issue.
It should be asked of every department, but
Oh, yeah.
public utilities is very critical
Every
to know.
department.
Yeah.
So what do you do now? How do you get from point A to point B?
Yeah.
Well,
It requires-
I think every business in the United States
Yeah.
more or less is having that issue. And thank God, we're smarter than everybody else.
Can you support
God.
that? Can you support that statement?
Okay,
It's a good thing you had
the
a mask.
camera's on, I am smart enough. Just kidding.
If you didn't have a mask on, we wouldn't be able to see that big smile behind
Yeah,
Wes.
yeah, I know, I just,
I can see.
I'm just having fun, I'm having fun.
It shows in his eyes.
That's right.
All right.
And it's truly affected all of us. I mean, there were times,
Oh, yeah.
I'm blessed that my husband does most of the grocery shopping, and you send out with a list, and he's constantly calling or texting saying, you can't get this. What, you know, well, let's change the whole menu. You know, it's,
Okay.
supplies are a problem.
It's sad to say, I would love to continue this discussion. But we do have to be out of here by 3 o'clock. I'm gonna try to call a pretty hard close at 2:45. Good news is we have 2 items on the agenda. The first one, I hope, is fairly quick, particularly without Karina. It's really hard to nail it to the floor, but let's just talk about it among us. And it's the budget guidance, which I hope you all kept last week's little package or have some form of copy of it. If you kept last week's agenda, it was one of the attachments. And if not, we can go out and make a couple copies. So who has a hard copy and who does not have a hard copy?
This hard copy that
Yeah. Yep.
says review 99.
That is correct. I believe so, anyway. It should say 910 on top, 910,
Is this
20.
the same one you're working on? Because I got several different.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, I
Top
mean,
says draft 2, budget guidance for 2022 budget.
right.
Th-
I might have a slightly different
Oh,
version, but it should
I'm sorry.
be substantially the same.
I was looking at your public utilities comments,
All right.
budget draft. Got it.
Okay, so before we start, do I need to make copies?
This has draft 2 at the top, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
correct, draft 2. How you doing there, Gary?
I'm lost in a sea of paper.
If I put this over here, Scoot, can you use mine?
Okay, I do have it.
Yeah, the last week's handout was two-sided, which at our advantage would confuse the heck out of anyone.
Basically a page and a half.
Page and a half, correct. Okay, I think a lot of us have seen this a bunch of times. Some of us may have seen it very few times, and I don't know who's been paying attention anyway. I would like to go through this quickly. Is that fair or unfair for you people? Okay. As far as I know, the first 2 bullets are not controversial. The third bullet has some typos which I have to clean up. At the bottom, it says the OMT will be updated to add 2028 at the end, and move unbudgeted items, it should say into 2022-2028. The OMT is expected to be reduced subsequent to the 2022 budget. I just wanted to confirm with Karina, who's not here, that last year, the operations and maintenance table were not in the budget package, and we didn't get copies of it for several months afterwards. And I'm assuming that was going to be the same procedure. I mean, I would like it to be in the budget, but just may run out of time. Last year, they just ran out of time. Right, so I don't know what the outcome is. That sentence has been in there for a while, so I'm assuming it stays.
Yes, you may have said it, I might have missed it.
Sure.
That last sentence should also say 2022.
Yeah, in other words, we will see the 2022 budget, and the board will approve it in October,
Yeah,
roughly October 15th. That version of the budget, I do not expect it to have the OM tables in it.
right.
In prior years, it was in it.
Yeah.
Okay,
It may be just, I'm just referring to a typo there.
yeah,
Should be 2022.
it should be 2022, correct.
Yeah.
The only issue that I have now is, having listened to Monday's discussion, Jeff was expecting a fairly full reconciliation. Not in the budget, but that was an additional work requirement that I didn't know about until Monday. And is that what you people heard?
Well, I heard it in the thing that is the budget prioritization policy, the last statement of that requires a line item reconciliation.
I think that's on an
The special
ongoing
accounting.
basis.
Yes, throughout the year,
Right.
updated quarterly.
But the
So
question is,
What am I
for
missing?
this budget,
Okay,
what was he requiring? And it sounded like to me he was. He wanted to essentially tag everything that was a medium,
no, a high priority.
anything that was a medium that became high. That's what I heard. And then, to me, it sounded like he basically wanted, it also, I tried to clarify this, but anything that was a high in 2021 that was not funded should presumably then roll over to 2022, maybe not 100% of them, but that would be included in a reconciliation.
I heard that,
Yes.
Yeah.
that's for sure. But I don't know if he meant as part of this.
Right, so the question,
or
right,
something else.
so from what I'm hearing is, we don't know exactly what's to be reconciled in the budget. I'm hesitant to, it would be nice if we had a clear statement that says there will be a reconciliation of the 2022 capital request to the OM tables. That would be a nice statement to make. But if that's not what we're asking for, we should just skip it. Just don't even bother.
That would be my interpretation, because from the beginning, we said this 7-year table would be the starting point for the budget every year, and it would just continue to roll. So if what we just went through was the 2022 and over, then when the 2022 budget comes out, if there are any differences from that budget, that proposed budget, with what had already been discussed in the OMT, then it would be explained.
Right,
The difference would be explained.
right.
Now, that to me is just almost rock solid. I don't know how we could justify spending that many hours doing what was done and then not do some sort of reconciliation like
Right.
you're talking about. To me, that would be a requirement. Now, wording that,
Well, I mean, first we gotta agree or disagree that the concept, however it was worded, is appropriate for this year. And maybe to a little counterpoint to what you just said, due to Jeff's graces, we got to see a draft of the upcoming policy, and the intent of that is to approve it before the, quote, before the vote. That's a little late to then apply it to this year's budget. I understand what you're saying 100%, but changing the rules at the very, very, very last moment, when staff is already, jacked to the max.
I think from what Karina was saying and heard
Yeah.
others say the other day, that comments on this proposed budget as they give it to her is very important and something we expect. So
Okay,
it may work out
It's what I
without.
thought I heard her say too, is
Yeah,
that
okay.
that the
So-
explanation is.
so we're not going to approve anything today, I don't think. But what I'm hearing you guys say, and I'm fine with it, because I really wanted to try to confirm what I heard and what people's intent were, but you think it's still in draft form, a sentence saying, in this year's budget, there will be a reconciliation of the capital request
Pardon me.
to the OM tables.
Don't you need it for historical tracking and for clarification to keep yourself in line with what you're doing and how you're getting there? I think it's very important.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm not
I know you're
disagreeing
not
that-
questioning, I think you're saying it is and you want us to,
No, I'm saying, is it fair game to state that we, for this year, we will reconcile the capital budget to the OM tables? Because we've never done it before. I mean, we've never done that in any way, shape, or form. Not prospectively, not retrospectively, nothing. This is just my take. This is the first year ever that we have paid more than 10 seconds of attention to the OM tables. And when I say we, I'm not saying the staff produces it, so they have to pay attention. But to me, the day I saw the first one, I said, this has the potential to be a really powerful tool, but it needs to be improved. The second year, they improved it, and I said, this has the potential to be a really powerful tool, but it probably needs a little bit more information. This year is the first year we've actually got it to the point where this is the first time, in my recollection, that the royal we have paid any attention to it or tried to use it. And when I see the request for reconciliation, then I'm saying, oh geez, that powerful tool thingy might come to pass. And, I'm excited about it.
At the end of the day, I think it needs to be done,
Right.
regardless. And I think it probably should be part of the 22,000
Well, it should be.
budget, yeah.
But I don't think we are at liberty. I mean, at this point, I think I hear everybody saying, yeah, Tom, draft something, stick it in there, and we'll see what happens when Larry comes back on Monday, and we can all, and in the meantime, we can all have, a crack at wordsmithing, which we love
We
doing.
were very good at it.
Well, but
I
again,
think we can, I think we can definitely recommend it, and
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely, that's what you're trying to do here, right?
Right.
Just make the recommendation, that's what
right.
we're recommending. Now, I don't know what Larry's and Jeff's take on it would be,
I
but
think,
well,
I
it's,
think we're all
it's
on the same page here.
Yeah,
in
I
that
think
by
so.
budget priorities, and I've got a simple mind, I'll admit, but in the budget prioritization, they pretty much specify that. I mean, it's establishment of the budget, what reviews will be done and how they'll be done.
right, right. Mhm,
And the terminology to me is exactly what we're asking for.
mhm.
So,
Right, the only
Are
issue
we-
is, in theory, we should never have seen that, and until it's policy, it ain't policy.
so.
true, but,
We're getting a sneak preview.
I didn't,
but do we need to spend time discussing it now if it's under the works and we'll resolve it next week?
Well, I think at this point, we're all in agreement. And I'm volunteering, I'm gonna try my
This-
best to
first
come up with a
off-
sentence.
Your comment there,
Mhm.
let me read it again. We just said expected. But I think even without what we know with the other stuff, it would still be a very good exercise to do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So we can always say, we didn't, ignoring that policy, we still would like to see
Right.
a reconciliation.
The sad news is, in theory, we should be having this discussion 2 months ago.
Sure, sure. We're knowing that we're doing hindsight's 20/20.
Oh,
Well,
well,
that's what I was thinking is,
yeah, we're almost as good at that as wordsmithing.
I'm going back to what Kathy just said, and when you look at B2, it says that.
B2 in,
And that's pretty much what you said, isn't it?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think we're,
And then section 5 clarifies it even further.
Okay.
And this may be silly too, but we're still writing budget guidance. Is it, do we need to submit budget guidance when the budget will be in our hands next week?
The most useful thing, other than what we're discussing, because what we're discussing, to me, didn't show up until Monday. However, the most useful thing about the budget guidance at this point is including in the budget package. That's about it.
You're setting yourself up for better success next year. And if you wait till next year, guess what? You're gonna be in the same situation.
Yeah, I-
Sounds good to me, okay.
I mean, I think in theory, if we do a postmortem on this, and, you know, I don't know if people really think this is a decent document or not, keep, toss, whatever, you know, we need to discuss it. But if we find this a valuable tool, we should have done this 2 months ago. And we're gonna conclude maybe in, you know, December, that we should take this out in May or June of next year, or July, whatever, and say, okay, let's, at the very front end of the budget process, see what we want to say this year. But, I mean, all this is a process issue. At this point, I'm really kind of hammer on one thing, and I feel 100% confident we have agreement. We are going to add one more sentence to that paragraph. Or we are going to recommend it, and then hopefully on Monday, clean, you know, put it to bed. Okay. Let's go to revenues. As far as I know, there's absolutely nothing controversial about any of those revenue things. Everybody has seen it a couple other occasions. I've gotten a variety of comments, and I think it's
Can I
cut and dry. Sure.
add one more? The second to last, other fee increases should have appropriate rationale provided.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps add with the metrics or number of usage, terminology's not good,
Mm-hmm.
but with the number of each fee sold, I mean, number of annuals, number of, however would write that sort of thing. To me, that would be very helpful in fee analysis.
Yeah,
Definitely
it
helpful for
absolutely
next
would
year.
be.
Yeah.
But I view that as a next year issue. It's
Okay.
way too late for this year.
Okay.
I agree with you
Speaking
100%.
of, this is kind of in preparation for
Yeah.
next
Yeah.
year, but
Yeah,
okay, good enough.
Yeah. Okay, maintenance, there was a little bit of pushback on maybe the second sentence, focus on basic services, less on amenities. That gives you, that's kind of a squishy statement. There was some push to make that almost no amenities, and in fact, one of the drafts had no amenities. So I like the squishy statement. Other people let me like more of a hardline statement. The bottom line is, are we comfortable with the wording here, or do we feel strongly that,
I got a question, basic services and infrastructure?
I was trying to, when I drafted that, I was trying to put something in front of less on amenities. You know, more on, the emphasis should be on something. The trouble is, and I would argue this pretty strongly, amenities are infrastructure.
Yeah, you can argue, I've seen that argument before.
Oh, yeah, but I'm,
Yeah, you could,
I'm valid. A golf course is infrastructure.
or a little softer way of saying it, more political way of saying it is primarily focus on.
Yeah. I mean, if people want primarily, that's fine.
To me, that's just a softer way of emphasizing it without negating the other one.
Yeah, this is wordsmithing, but, okay.
Yeah,
From my standpoint, the first sentence is all we need. I don't know if we need the other, but it's
Well-
okay as is, because it's,
It
What
could read
what
that
is
first.
existing and new? The other is, you know, less, I mean, you know, less on essentially infrastructure. But the trouble with infrastructure is there's no, people have in their minds what infrastructure is. And I don't know,
I
that
guess
second
it's-
sentence is very, shall we say, craftsy.
well, it is, because it almost implies that there's a misspending going on, and I think we're basically taking care of the very basics of services and amenities, you know, to what just needs to be done.
Yeah, just reading social media, there's vociferous disagreement with what you just said.
Yeah, but social media doesn't
Well,
get
the
a
thing
great
is
deal
that-
of respect
yeah, the
in my
thing is-
mind.
Well, you know,
one other thought from where I've come from is we would have added in the word safety.
excuse me, I don't know why.
That's not a bad idea.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't even know I had my phone in my
Yeah,
pocket.
because when we tried to prioritize, we would always put safety as highest. And then
Mhm.
maintenance of the existing,
Okay,
but safety trumped everything.
okay. I'm gonna make a call on this.
We could put it as,
I think it's too late for us to get into wordsmithing too much. Keep that in mind for next year. The odds of us actually remembering any of this conversation next year is pretty slim. But I don't hear strong disagreement with this paragraph or any necessity to change it. So I would just prefer to leave it alone.
That, or you could go to just the first bullet point and add less on expansion, comma, new initiatives, and comma, and amenities.
I can live with
Just in the
that.
one.
I like that better.
Okay, so strike the second sentence, put a comma and amenities.
Yeah.
Very good. Hey, that's progress. Marketing, I've so far gotten no comments. Reserves, you guys know all about that. Can you know, any strong discomfort, I guess that's probably the best standard, which is, you know, we've gone over this numerous times. If there's strong disagreement, if we're mostly wordsmithing and nuance, the intent is, we need to get this out, really. Otherwise, it'll live for 2 more years. Haven't heard anything, so I'm just gonna go to subsidization.
And the yellow stuff just all goes away.
Well, I would hope not. Subsidization, up to the yellow stuff, up to the very last line, in case, you know, you probably can't see this. If you have a photocopy, the yellow is in photocopy. There were no comments except, you know, once you start with the word golf, you can see that there was some commentary, and that's really what I was trying to resolve. There were really 2 points of view. One, strike golf entirely, and the second was to have say something about golf. The point of view that I have on golf is, A, it's big, and we can ignore it, or we can say something about it. The second is continue to seek opportunities to grow revenues. That is almost a gratuitous comment. I agree with that, with emphasis on outside runs. The only really thing, that's about the only strategy I've heard with golf, grow outside runs. If you want to strike it, you know, fine. If you want to say that's the only strategy that I have ever heard in terms of growing revenues, that was my point of view. With that, I turn it over to you, Pete.
You could add something like, although this has been semi-rejected by the golf committee, but and explore other areas of expanding play, including fling golf.
Including what?
Fling?
I'm
Using a-
not adding fling golf.
Disc golf.
Huh?
Disc golf. I mean, there's other opportunities that they can seek, and I would just put it on them to seek opportunities. I don't care whether you do it more
Yeah.
rounds, whether you do it with
Alternative.
more special events, like
Grow revenue.
big hole, large hole golf event.
Yeah.
Like you said, we actually created a disc golf course.
Well, seeking
But put
opportunities.
it back onto them and don't give them how, just,
Well, you know,
Do
I
it.
don't think this thing is to try to shift, you know, stuff onto specific committees. It's just sort of what we should be trying to do. And we should be trying to, I don't think anybody argues that we should continue to seek opportunities to grow revenues. That's a universal thing.
and I just leave it there.
Okay.
My thought, I would also leave it there. I don't know if you guys do this or not, but after some period of time, you know, maybe it's at the end, in the early part of 22, when 21 is done and over with, and if you gone back to some of these items on here and say, okay, what did we do in trying to expand opportunities? And it's kind of like, you didn't, well, that, you know, why not, you know?
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
kind of thing,
I
and
agree.
that's just my take on it.
Okay. So
If
what I'm
you
hearing-
eliminate it, then it's gone. But
I can always bring it back.
it's more
next year.
about, what's the saying, keep it in front of everybody kind of thing, rather than leave it off and it's out of sight, out of mind.
Okay. So what I'm hearing from the group is, if the general choices were strike it, keep it, I'm definitely hearing keep it.
I'd keep it, I'd just
Yeah.
switch, I wouldn't take the emphasis, I'd end it at grow revenue.
To what?
In the sentence with grow revenue.
They didn't catch what you, sorry.
I would suggest that we read it as golf, continue to seek opportunities to grow revenue, period.
Period? Okay. Everybody okay with that?
That'd be fun.
Okay.
Like that.
Yeah, the only thing about, and I mean, I've struck it, but just, this is sort of like if, you know, lunchtime conversation. If you're talking about big dollars, outside rounds, that's it. That's, I mean, you can do all the other things and it would be kind of small. If you sit around and listen to the golf guys, all they talk about, and this is overstatement, all they talk about is 600,000+ of outside rounds this year. I mean, you know, I'm not in charge of the golf department, But if I were, king of the world, I would look at Tom and say, so how do you make that $1 million?
You
But-
can have some impact on it,
Mm-hmm.
both short-term and long-term, by coming up with some creative ideas how
Mm-hmm.
to expand your existing memberships use of the golf courses.
I agree with that, but they've been
And that's
pushed,
why I'm saying I wouldn't want to put all the focus on bringing in outside.
I don't think anybody is. I think the golf committee is always looking for what I call programs, primarily focused on internal people. I mean, I don't think the golf committee lives in a binary world. It's like outside rounds. It's not an either or. We gotta do everything. But anyway.
I feel like I'm beating this to death.
Yeah, we have to go down to new commercial, operational, and residential development. Commercial, one suggestion was eliminate this category. Alternatives, seek appropriate partnerships to provide lodging facilities. Any thoughts on that? Put something in there. Those are your two your two choices.
The way I see it worded there in your alternative, seems like there's a little bit of an implication that the POA will fund money to it when you say
Yeah.
seek partnerships.
Um,
And I'm not sure that that's what you want to say right now anyway.
We'll build a hotel. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I agree that any hint of POA money going into the hotel, we should do everything we can to avoid
Yes.
hinting that. But the issue that I have is that I think it's Article 2 of the budget policy has this as a category. So if you see what Jeff sent us, we are to have strategies regarding commercial development. It says that black and white. I can't name a single one. I have no idea. I'm not a fan of striking categories entirely because it's like it doesn't exist. But if I can't come up with a single thing to say, and that was the only thing I could come up with, I lean heavily to striking the entire category.
Well, if this is gonna just keep things in front of them, I think commercial in terms of a lodge, but maybe
Yeah.
encourage private investment, use all methods to encourage private investment in or near the village. Just a suggestion.
That's great.
And in terms of residential,
Mhm.
what they're doing, like what Brandon,
Well, we have to focus on commercial.
Okay.
Residential, I got tons of things I can say
Okay.
about that. But how do we feel about commercial? Strike or some version of the alternative or something else?
This is a wishy-washy answer, but it's
Yeah.
strike it or you gotta revise the wording. I would be
Oh, yeah, I'm fine with
More-
revising the version.
more inclined to revise wording.
Okay,
So something along the lines of what Kathy just mentioned.
okay. Any other thoughts? Path A, strike, path B, something about, is there anything we can do to encourage the building of a lodge? I mean, it's just,
I think it's worthwhile leaving it in there,
Okay.
but
How about
emphasizing
then,
private investment.
encourage outside investors to consider building a lodge here?
Or commercial development in or around the village. You can take commercial development however you want to.
You want to limit to lodging, I think it should be beyond just
I'd rather see a
lodging.
grocery store than a lodge.
Yeah.
Well, so would I, but that's
Would
been
too.
rejected, but,
So-
to
But
me.
you can word it so that it
Okay,
doesn't limit it to lodging. And I don't know how to do it either, but I think it should be more global
okay, that's
than
fine.
lodging.
Yeah.
So we're thinking of encourage commercial development in or around the village. Is that pretty much the exact wording? Encourage commercial development in or around the village.
You can throw in the term, the third-party investors or private investors.
Well, I think takes out the, we're putting money
Kind of
into
implies
it.
it.
Encourage, okay, so encourage private commercial development or encourage
Outside.
private investors to develop commercial, something like that?
Commercial development by private investors, or by
Private
investors,
investors.
Or
or
even outside.
anybody other than the POA?
There you go, say it like it is.
Yeah, yeah, we put disclaimer, POA, not put money in.
Yeah.
Okay, so right now I got encourage commercial development by private investors in or around the village. Okay. Operational. Problem with operational is, at first I had no idea what that even meant. A suggestion was focus on replacing obsolete technology, improving technological footprint. The second was continue to seek operational efficiencies, including application of technology. The first one, pretty much came from the board.
I like your alternative better, though.
The second one,
It's more inclusive.
yeah, the second one, I was really leveraging off of a presentation that Karina did like 6 months ago.
I like your sentence, your alternative sentence, and I'm not real big on the first sentence.
Okay.
And do we want to encourage and/or, which is what Paul Moore did earlier, reducing duplication of tech, since we were
Well,
playing
that's
two
operational.
companies?
That's operational
Okay.
efficiency.
That's efficiency.
I think the alternative is spot on
Mhm.
with no change, in my opinion.
Okay, so why don't we just go with the alternative? Residential, again, alternative one is eliminate. The second is continue emphasis on increasing housing growth, attracting builders, and increasing neighborhood development packages. That's code for CIEGO.
Yes.
And continue to improve broker relationships, real estate partnership program results, and revenues. When I drafted the two bullets, it's like, we've been doing that for a while. There's nothing new there. It was intended to be generic. And I think Karina, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, was pretty agreeable to that language.
Yeah.
I don't have any issues with any of that, the alternatives.
Okay. Unless anybody has any comments, why don't we just go with that? You okay with that? Okay, striking the strike. Land acquisition and divestiture. Again, one suggestion was eliminate this category. The alternative was develop strategies for POA-owned lot management, especially regarding suspension and managing non-paying lots and collections. I'm pretty sure that Karina is okay with that one because she's the one who added end collections. Again, there's nothing in there that we aren't, to a great degree, trying to execute today. So again, it was meant to be generic. I'm not, the idea wasn't to force anybody to do something they weren't doing already. So. So any comments?
None from me.
I think it's good to leave in there.
Okay. So I'm going to strike the strike, and with that, any other comments on this document? Anything that you really feel, yeah, we really, really missed, or really, really shouldn't be in here? Okay, with that, I will take another whack at revising this. It shouldn't take long at all. and ask Larry to put it on the agenda for Monday, hopefully for essentially an up or down vote. Things just don't work out that way, but we can always hope. Okay, with that, let's move on to continued discussion on reserve policy. We have an hour to discuss it, and then we have to put a hard stop to it. With that, unfortunately, Karina is not here to give us an update on line of credit, but otherwise, I'll let Larry
Have you
and
talked to her?
Becky.
Did she hear from them Monday?
Pardon me?
You've talked to Karina. Did she hear from them Monday? She thought she'd hear from
She
them.
thought she'd hear by the end of the day. I didn't even bring it up or ask her about it.
Okay. Take it away.
Just maybe a couple of comments on this final, the emergency draft, or the emergency reserve fund. This may be more, not a question for us here, because I don't know. Becky and I just talked about it beforehand. We're just not sure how they manage revisions. And looking at this particular policy, the original policy was more about, if I recall correctly, it was like a reserve fund policy. Now it's kind of morphed into this emergency reserve policy. And whether or not there should be at least some statement in this policy that basically this new emergency reserve policy replaces the original reserve policy. I don't know
You keep
how.
it the same name, the same number in the policy,
Yeah.
or you could do it by giving it a new number and recommending the elimination of this one.
If this were last April or May, the general intent was to try to take all of the various financial policies, which are basically chapter one. I mean, they're scattered through chapter one, and then move everything to a new chapter, like chapter 10. So if you look in the policies, there's a policy here or there that says,
Move
chapter
to-
7 struck, and then boom, I think right now in chapter 10, there may be 3 policies. But I think some of them were replacements of old policies. And I think with the ones that Larry is working on with other people, I think they're destined for chapter 10. But that's my guess. So in terms of what you're saying, I mean, we might have to look at it, check up on it and all this other stuff. But I think ultimately, it would be reasonable to strike chapter 1 entirely and replace it with what might be, and put it in chapter 10, article 3 and article 4, whatever.
But you still have to deal with this one.
Yes, you do.
And my suggestion would be to say right up here under purpose,
Uh-huh.
this is
Okay, that's fine.
a modification
Mhm.
of the original Article 10
Mhm.
reserve funds, last updated or adopted, or give it a date when it was,
Mhm.
and replaces it with this effective 2022. And I
Mhm.
think if you
That's
put that
fine.
right up there in the purpose of it,
Mhm.
is it is to replace it, and it, furthermore, you can even write into it, it builds on or expands on that with the purpose of establishing emergency funds. And so that was kind of what I bounced off from Carl, and I think it needs to be dealt with, and to me, that would be a clean way of dealing with it.
All right. Makes sense to me.
Seems like a really good idea.
Yeah,
It doesn't
Right.
just say it's scrapped, it
Yeah,
specifically
and
states
it recognizes that it
replaces
built
this.
on the concepts here,
Yes.
yeah.
and further defines it to this purpose.
In theory, not to hurt anybody's feelings, if we had a strong secretary, Not you,
Corporate secretary.
I'm talking who used to be Marcy, then used to be Stephanie,
Yeah.
and I don't know that there's been a new appointed secretary. But,
John.
but Marcy,
John Paul.
According to the stuff on
Isn't
today's board
Katrina
meeting, there
now?
was one.
well,
John Paul.
Well, John Paul is the corporate secretary right now.
right now, right. But if you were to ask Marcy, she had really strong opinions
Yeah.
about secretarialness. I'm not so sure that Stephanie was in the position long enough to
To,
develop the same point of view, and it doesn't matter because she's not
She's gone.
here. But the secretary, I think, my guess is the keeper of this.
Yeah.
But,
technically, if you look at Robert's rules and all that, the secretary is the keeper of corporate records.
yeah, so, well, by your statement, you know more about what you just said and asked tonight.
I've been going through all the policies.
Mhm.
And there's a handful of obvious corrections that need to be made because of what was done last year in such a hurried fashion. But when I first started talking with Larry about the new budget priority policy, it was in my mind to modify what was already there. But obviously, there are opinions about
Yeah.
whether to start from scratch or modify one that's already there because, well, for a lot of reasons. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm not sure where that's going yet. There are some policies that we will get to eventually, but we've had so many important things to dig into. We've been putting off some things. Now, this budget priority policy, in my mind, is one policy, but it affects some other policies. So we've got to pull all those together, and I'm not going to, if Larry still thinks a replacement policy, so to speak, is the best way to go, I probably won't go against that idea. But, long story, but we have a lot of policies to look at.
Right. I can only tell you when this committee was first formed in roughly April of last year, May, one of its objectives was to take all the financial policies as of today, then, rewrite them and stick them into Chapter 10. The other thing is that sort of implies when the opportunity arises, put all the financial policies in one place instead of having them all over the place. You have to back things up a little bit.
Yeah.
It's good to me that we're talking about structural things as opposed to the policy itself.
Yeah.
But,
I strongly recommend that, getting back to, if you were to look at the two policies, they definitely are related to each other. The concepts are a lot, and there's a lot of the same wording. But if you pull the old one and compared it to the new one, there's significant differences, and I think it should just be recognized that it builds on, but replaces
Yeah.
that one. Because if you look at A is different, B is different, the purpose is different. The operating reserves carries. But then as you get back into it further, there's a lot of new wordage in this one. And,
yeah, it's
I
definitely we
I
started
suggest we
with.
just deal with that whole thing by saying
Mhm.
it is built upon,
Yeah.
but is a replacement
Yeah.
for this
I
one
mean-
dated here,
Yeah.
replaces that one dated there. And then
Yeah.
somebody can always have a reference to go back to and say, oh, I wonder what it used to be.
Okay. I mean-
I might suggest if you can just
I know where you're going.
write that first word, because I don't take good notes, but
I
that's
knew
why I
that
could
as
never
soon as
be
I
a
opened my
secretary.
mouth.
Yeah, but do that, and I can
Yeah,
incorporate it in there and then pass it out.
Right.
But if you'll do
Yeah.
that, get it fixed.
okay.
With that said, was there anything else? I know we still have the line of credit issue to resolve, so we can't do anything with the policy right now.
Correct.
But is there any other issues, concerns, questions about the policy as written now with the one change that we, okay?
Now, maybe I didn't write off or print off the most recent. Did you incorporate defining biennially, not the word, but a start date that Jeff had mentioned?
I did. I thought maybe I missed it.
Yeah,
because I
it
had a
was in
couple of
the
times.
very, 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 very
Yeah, I was gonna say, this may have been a generation, I assume it's probably in section
Right.
4, in all probability.
Do it. I put in fact,
Okay.
Well, I mean, I think at
If
this point
if
it's,
it's there, we'll see it before it's
Here's what I printed
approved.
off
Just
just before I came.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Yeah, I said beginning 2022. I actually had a question about that, but beginning 2022, and at least biennially after that, or thereafter, blah, blah, blah.
and
Question
that-
is 2022 the right year to actually start? I wasn't sure if the board would review after the audit's done, or if they review it now.
That's been what they've done is.
After the audit.
The audit is first part of the year, and by mid-year, this year it was mid-year,
Right,
the board transferred funds.
right. So it would be appropriate,
So would
probably
you,
after the audit, to
would you say following the 2021 audit, the board will do this in the future?
It'd be 2022 audit, wouldn't it?
it'd
The
be
next one.
2021 audit.
2021
technically, but-
audit.
Okay,
They're auditing this.
done in
year.
2022, gotcha.
Yeah. I'm gonna point out the obvious, not that at this point, it's like, I don't care anymore.
Yeah.
As far as I know, we have no reserve goal for this budget. It defaults to 0. Or some other default number, but the only number I can think of is 0. So, and that's that.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, it's like, okay, move on. You know.
I do want to say one thing.
Hmm?
Carl's put a lot of work into this, and I appreciate it. I think he's done
Carl
a
has
very
put a
good
lot of
job.
work in it, and I appreciate it.
He's done a yeoman's job.
Yes,
Thank you.
yeah, really, thank you, thank you. Is that it?
That was it. That was it on the
Yes.
the reserve, emergency reserve.
So at this point, with a few minor edits, well, and what Becky said, which we hope will be a minor edit, and waiting for the line of credit feedback, at which point we'll have to figure out what that means. We hope that this is as close to done as done gets until we see more stuff.
Right.
Okay,
You can beat a dead horse only so far.
That's right.
okay. Please continue.
Please continue. All right. Becky, you can jump in at any time, but let me get my stuff straight. Okay, working capital funds. I think I have a much better understanding of the purpose of the working capital fund. I think now, I feel like I have a better understanding of the purpose of it. I think there's probably the structure, how it's working, where do you get the funds, that I need some guidance on, you know, and sort of, or suggestions on how to create that. It's like, where do the funds come from? You know, it's very easily in the emergency reserve fund, where you say the fund, it'll come from these certain sources. Is it, and that could be even the budget, is like, these, anything that you plan is gonna be budgeted. That's where it's gonna come from. But is that the right path? Are there other suggestions? You know, and it may.
Never ask me for suggestions.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna get
I
them.
appreciate your suggestions. It makes me become more critical thinker, but I'm just not totally comfortable. I know the purpose. I'm still trying to grasp the concept of where is it gonna come from? Who sets the targets? What do you use as the basis for those targets? I like the idea of, you know, saying it's 20% of assets or net assets or whatever. It's, you know, that's in theory, that's what a lot of reserve studies will suggest or what other reserve gurus will say. But is it realistic? You know, should the board, you know, I just, those are just things right off the top of my head that I'd like to get other input on.
And I'm gonna jump, what is that, a Japanese beetle there?
Or ladybird?
I think that's Japanese, no, maybe it's a ladybug. It's a
It's a
ladybug.
ladybug.
Good luck.
Yeah. Good luck with developing this.
I'm gonna jump in here, and there's been some back and forth between the three of us, and also with Karina. And I naturally go back to my past experience. And good, bad, or indifferent, that has shaped me in a lot of ways, has shaped my opinions in a lot of ways. And it does vary from what is being done here. It does vary from how other organizations may act. Let me just tell you where I'm coming from, not that that's where it's where we have to go, to answer some of your questions. Back 15 years ago, so my experience goes back that far, became involved with this whole question in another organization, and the way they addressed it was they created a working fund for the replacement of assets. It was a tremendous job, but it included the building's roof, the building's air conditioning, the building's carpeting, the building's kitchen. You know, the roads went into it, the golf court paths and bunkers went into it. A huge, broad spectrum of the assets. And the first job was identifying them, because it was, you know, a big job and it's much smaller, about a fifth the size of this. So, you know, it wasn't like a 2-apartment building type of situation. But that was the starting point. And then each asset was given a replacement cost and a replacement life. And that then was all put into a replacement plan, so that you could pull it out that, you know, in the next 5 years, we are going to have $10,000 to replace this roof. We're going to have, on an ongoing basis, $50,000. I'm making up numbers, okay? I don't remember it. But for replacing the road right-of-ways and on down. The golf cart paths got dealt with every other year, the sand traps the other year. And so the plan was laid out, and here's how much money. And so it was then taken into a spreadsheet that, okay, this year you're going to have to replace this year this. And took those numbers, divided into the amount of time you had until that. And that became the financial part of the plan. It then became a annually budgeted item. If you knew that you were going to have this much money to be in good shape, and it goes up and down. I mean, it doesn't stay, because it's a working capital fund. But you always had to be in a position that you never were negative. You could get some ridiculously high numbers, because next year you might go down ridiculously low, but it was divided out so that you would have the money there. And it was a addition to the monthly assessment. And so when you did your budget, your yearly budget, they were able to convince themselves the Universal themselves, the members, and the members became kind of adamant that you are going to do this, board, now that you say it. And so that was, probably in the neighborhood of maybe 10 to 15% of the budget was for this, because they were taking care of everything. And so that's where I come from. And talking with Karina, a small portion of that already exists here. But it's bits and pieces. It's not one overall blanket plan. And what you were able to do with this plan, and I was in a situation where I had to be part of dealing with it. They had a item on this plan, replacement of a bridge. And it was gonna cost you, in the plan, $250,000 to replace that bridge. And that bridge needed to be replaced in 2020. Well, got to be 2020, and the engineering people came in and said, yep, you really do have to do that, because it has reached the point that that bridge cannot safely carry those little kids on the school bus. And they have to cross that bridge, or they have to go 10 miles out of their way twice a day to get those little kids. Now, that kind of put a lot of focus on where are you going to get the money to replace that bridge. Well, it came in that it was going to cost $500,000 to replace that bridge. The money had been put in for half of it. The advantage of doing a global plan like that compared to piecemeal, like a lot of things are done here, it is done in some degree, but it then gave you the ability to look at the fund as a working capital fund. So let's look at where we stand on everything we need to do this year. Well, the next big item, kind of like here, the next big item was roads. And a fair amount of chunk of money had been put into roads for that year. Called in the road engineer and said, you've done such a fantastic job of maintaining your roads, you don't have to spend $250,000 on your road this year. And in fact, that expenditure can be pushed back for a number of years yet. And so therefore, having this global fund, it then allowed the board, and they had to make a choice. Do we take this recommendation, or do we go out and take a loan to get the money? And so being able to put it into a global fund like that gave everybody a little bit of wiggle room to be able to not hit a tough spot. And so that's how they did it, and they have worked that way for 15 years. And there was a whole lot of discussion that just kind of got resolved 2 years ago. What level do we fund this? And they hit the 20%. And Carl, I was going to respond back to you, that's a very common number, but I think, just me talking out loud, I think for an organization this big, you are looking at a huge fund. I think that 20%, it should be some kind of a sliding scale. The more amenities you have, the lower percentage you should be carrying to fund it, because you're not going to be hitting, you came up with a number very similar to mine. If you followed that thought path, you would be sitting on, up and down, it comes and goes, but you'd be sitting on something that would average out, probably, I think, Carl, closer to 15 to 18 million, based on all the amenities that are here. And so you have to give it a little bit of consideration. I mean, if you're a very small homeowners corporation that's only got 3 little buildings and a swimming pool, well, you better have a little bit higher percentage into it. If you're kind of a mega community like us here, you don't want to, you shouldn't have to have that much to be able to meet the same goal. So those are my thoughts, and that's my experience and where I come from. And like I said, this corporation, they call themselves corporations, an association, got themselves into this very deeply invested, in the membership deeply invested. And so it is extremely unusual. I think we all can come up with case after case after case where you can go down timeshares, condos, on down to the extreme would be down to Florida, where they had the condo collapse because they didn't maintain a reserve. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I recognize, like I told you guys, nothing that I'm talking about is easy. It's difficult. I do think it's possible, and I do think in one form or another, it's essential that something along that line happens, because the roofs are going to continue to fail, the roads are going to continue to fail, even after we get past this special assessment. And I hate to say it, but if you don't plan to succeed, you end up failing. You don't,
You know,
and so that's my background, that's my soapbox. I've been on it for years. I believe in it so intensely that I do it with my own budget. And I've saved I was gonna say my butt, but that's not the right thing to say, so I won't say I saved my butt. But I saved a lot of angst personally because of that planning and that setting aside, and it's tough. It is extremely tough to do, first to find the money, and then the other thing you get when you do this, because we're talking such huge numbers, just based on the scope of who we are, you've got this huge amount of money that to the membership looks like you just have all this money sitting out there, so why are you asking me to pay my dues? You don't need my money. You got millions sitting out in the bank. And so it's a real hard time educating the board, educating the membership. It can be done. It's hard. And everything I'm talking about here is very hard to do. But I do think it's, to one degree or another, absolutely, absolutely essential for the success of any organization.
now given
And so
my-
that's my soapbox, and I can keep going as long as you want to listen.
I don't, I definitely agree with a lot of what you're saying.
It becomes a question of how and how much, I think.
It becomes down to how and how much, and also there is, I believe, a balancing act
That's part of the how.
between, you know, how the community perceives it versus, you know, the reality of things. And I think it's in my opinion, it's an unusual situation here. There is a lot of varying opinions on how things should be done. And if you've got an extra $2 million of cash, why are you increasing assessments? Well, there is a huge amount of education that needs to be done, but that's difficult, I think, in a community of, I don't know what the population is here, but 17 or 18,000 people, difficult. Comes down to the how, the
Yeah,
how.
we only had to convince
Yeah.
5,000 people, and it took us
Yeah.
years to do it, but
Well-
gosh, then when we tried deviating,
Now, I also
To
think
me-
that from what I've observed is that a few years ago, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but a few years ago, there wasn't much of a reserve, if any at all.
It was a what?
Zero
Much of a
reserve.
reserve, of any sort of reserve,
zero.
if any at all. And so coming to today, when, if my math is correct, it's a total of around, I think I mentioned 8 million, but that might be high. But that's including everything.
That's including Satera and all of that stuff.
There you go.
Thank you.
I copied what you said.
Yeah, every month our cash position is published as a part of the balance sheet.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
goes up, it goes down,
Mhm.
and there are pieces already in place in different locations in the accounting system.
Well,
But
this
if
is,
we, it comes down to though, we all have our philosophical beliefs of how this should all be done. I think the reality is, how do we get it done? And a structure and a policy. And if we were to take the emergency fund policy, it's similar, it's not exact, but it's similar. And it's like, what are the starting points? And I don't know if we know that today. I know Gary put out the memo earlier this year, back in June, I believe, and he had set the amounts of whatever they were, this, coming from, I just looking at this, which I think Jeff had created. You know, I don't know the starting points. Is it this? Is it something else? Then that seems to be more of a current goal. Is there a longer term goal that needs to be established? What is that? Where does the money come from? What's the mechanism? What, I don't know, the methodology or logic of how it's to be funded each year? And
Now, in this particular case I had, it was, the first policy said based on depreciation. But it was, each year it was to be funded based off from the projected amount that you're gonna need. What was gonna be your cost? Therefore, you had to make sure that, and to make it even worse, I'm interrupting you, but
That's all right.
I'm on a roll. To make it even more difficult here is there is, I believe, an interaction between this fund and the emergency reserve fund, because to some degree, some of the costs incurred underneath an emergency would logically be something that would come out of a reserve fund. I mean, if you lost a piece of equipment, you were already planning to replace that piece of equipment to some degree. So you've already saved up 10% or 50% or whatever percent. And so I would see that in an emergency, some of that cost would come from what you'd already saved for its replacement in your working, whatever you want to call this, I call it the replacement reserve. And so I think in reality, they're going to kind of blend together a little bit.
I think all of the policies are going to intertwine
Yeah.
to some degree. I also think that, thinking about it a little bit and some of what you said, that we do actually have some basis for it in the OMT table. And they do have a 7-year projection
Yeah.
of replacements. And maybe that's the basis to look at. It's like, you know, do you look at that and say, okay, we need to fund or set up a reserve that would be the next 2 years estimated, or some percent of the estimated purchases or needs capital for the next, you know, couple of years or few years or whatever, but there is some thought
And that's
process in
Here's
that.
here's the simplistic accounting term. To me, we've done what, that's not, and maybe I'm wrong, but that's not the purpose of the working capital fund.
That's good.
At least I think. We've done it with the OMT. We've found the funding for it. Hopefully it will pass and we have it. And we've made it available, you know, and if not, there are other
So,
options. But the working capital fund, to get to it specifically rather than philosophically, I thought was largely stemmed from when Charles King was here, and basically they called it rollover.
mhm.
The funds that they don't spend this year got, I think they were called it chicken picked, or there was a less politically correct term, but I don't want to use it. But it was just taken away from other necessary needs. And then comes time, okay, say there's a $250,000 project, they can't complete it this year. They take it put it in the next year's budget, but never funded it. That's what this fund does. If you've got it budgeted in the current year, it now goes into an account for that project. And I thought that's all the working
Yeah.
capital fund was.
And-
Can I get,
and was-
can we get a good definition from an accountant about what a working capital fund is? Does working capital fund, if you were just to talk to other accountants about that, would that exclude capital reserve funds?
In my mind, when you say working capital, it excludes any capital. Working capital is the cash you need to operate your business on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, that's pretty much what I thought.
Right.
So.
And that goes back to why
on
I
today's
want to
books-
redefine stuff, because we
Is
keep
that
talking
what
with
this fund is
definitions
supposed to
and
be
we
from
go.
what you
There
think?
are two definitions of capital. One is simply cash. And the other, in the context that we're using it, is what a financial analyst would call CapEx, cap expenditures, which is different from cash. It's you're buying
Right.
a truck.
Yeah, I don't
And when we're
particularly,
using the word capital primarily in terms of CapEx, but people who actually run businesses, like, no, capital is just money. Money to be used
So-
however one.
Yeah.
And
So
that's why-
there is a issue of nomenclature, for
yes,
sure.
absolutely.
Which is what we
That's
got
fine.
into in our conversation here,
Well,
because we're using
but-
different terms, and I kind
Well,
of
the
said,
thing is,
I'm just gonna
if you
define.
guys want to come up with terms that we should always use, that's fine.
Yeah,
We
It's
just need to find it and
When we
agree.
start, we need to call something something.
Yeah.
Even if we call it Bill
policy,
or
policy
Charles.
A.
Yeah, well, call it whatever you want. We have to get past the issue of nomenclature, otherwise we just twist
Right.
ourselves in knots.
Like I
But-
said, here's
Just call
how
it a
I'm gonna
working
define it,
fund.
you can put whatever name you want on it.
Not
but we need
acceptable,
to define it.
not acceptable.
I-
We all have to be on the same page. You cannot say, I'm gonna call it this, I don't care what you people
No,
call
I'm
it.
agreeing with you, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah.
I'm just saying,
But
we
we-
just have to come to,
I-
okay, you
And
call
I'm
that, I
looking-
call it, now we are going to call it.
And I'm looking for you, me, and as soon as I leave this chair, I'll be out of this chair, but I would be looking to you guys to say, this is an issue that stops us from going forward.
Look how confused we are.
Well, actually, I'm not
Yeah.
confused, but I'm looking for the group to be all on the same page.
Yeah.
Well, working capital is what it takes to cover payroll, keep the lights on.
That's right. In theory, that's, in accounting perspective, that's correct.
In addition to, or after deducting
Right.
the plans we've made for capital replacement, hardware replacement,
So it's
based
like-
on our projected revenues.
Right.
Projected revenue, take how much capital we promised to put back into the community.
Mhm.
Do we have enough working capital to keep the lights on, keep the employees paid? Now, and I hope we start using the preferred or the actual terms from accounting world. You know, some of us in our daily work, we come up with some little short word.
Mhm.
If it's working capital, let's call it what it is.
So that's what I would
And
kind
the
of,
reserves,
it's like operating capital. It's like your daily operating capital.
And
Well,
again, not
it-
to be stupid, but isn't that the Cetera fund? Isn't that how
No,
Karina uses
The
that?
Cetera fund, Cetera
Isn't that-
refers to the name of the guy who owns the firm that's managing the money. What's actually in there is, as far as I know, is a bunch of rolling
CDs.
CDs for the purpose of being our operating, emergency operating
Right.
fund. That is the Cetera account. Our intention, if we're lucky, we will never, ever, ever touch that money, if we're lucky.
Okay, I thought
Required reserve.
Karina said she used that occasionally for cash flow purposes.
No, that's the problem with the line of credit. The
Okay,
first thing you would probably do, if you have actually ran out of money, is to tap the line of credit. And Cetera, the money or the securities in that fund securitizes the line of credit. And we're trying to renegotiate that whole thing, so maybe, maybe not, it's an unsecured line of credit. But, I mean, that's a whole nother issue. And it's, all this financial stuff is for the people with big brains and stuff, and, you know,
or for those with
Okay,
accountants
whatever.
versus bookkeepers.
Right.
But don't we have two working funds, a public utilities or public
Okay.
works?
There's two working capital funds.
Yes.
For now, this referred to as working capital fund, which
until we
is,
decide to rename
yeah,
it.
which
Okay.
consists of the public utilities, for public utilities, and one
Mm-hmm.
for general
Yeah.
operating.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the way I understand it.
And they were
That's what I
set up
thought
for the
too.
first time 2 weeks
With-
ago.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, oh, you mean,
It's the first time they were funded.
oh, funded?
If you look at the balance sheet, if
Yes.
you go back,
Oh, you
if
said,
you go back 6
They
weeks.
were never funded
It didn't
before.
exist. There's zero. I mean, there's not even a name. If you look at
Not even a
this,
line item.
that was done this summer.
that was done midsummer.
it was approved.
Oh.
It was
okay.
not funded. To me, I live in the world where you got cash, I got cash. You got nothing, I got nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it was approved, but it takes a while to actually put money
Okay.
into an account. On 8/31, it was the first time we got exactly 1.5000 million in the general fund,
General capital fund.
right, and $99,000 in the utility fund. And and those exist today.
Can
We
let me
should
ask a question
Yeah.
unrelated to this?
Hmm?
But you mentioned the 831 financials.
Yeah.
Which you didn't attach, but I went to the website, and the 831s weren't there.
You have to
How
go
do
to
you-
the board agenda. It's on the board
Oh,
agenda.
okay.
Underneath
It's
their
usually
attachments there.
Monday,
Yeah,
sometime Monday prior to the mid-month business meeting.
Okay, all right, thank you.
and then it takes a while for them, for them to put it in the
That's what-
financial section.
That accounts
So-
for some of the stress Karina had last week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was trying to get that done.
Get that done, okay. So going back to the intent of this working capital fund as it's been currently defined, I see it as like, it should consist of stuff that was, I don't want to use it, but I'm going to use it, but the rollover from 2020.
Which is what the 99,000 is.
Okay. And it should then, in theory, consist of most or some of the 2021, or actually, if we're looking at 22, or the 2022 capital expenditures.
Nope. I thought we were talking about working capital.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Okay, time out.
Okay.
Because we use that term.
Let's call a quick timeout here. What traditional accountants, people who, quote, will work for a living, unquote, refer to as working capital, which is turn the lights on and, buy copy toner and stuff. We call, if you look at the balance sheet, operating funds. That's what it's called. So
Which is my non-technical brain label on it.
that is what we call operating funds.
Well,
Okay, now you may continue.
no,
When he says working capital fund, and if it helps change the nomenclature, I don't care, but,
But from what I heard from Jeff
okay, time
last
out.
week,
Why don't you just call it the 1.5 million, because that's what it is.
okay, the 1.5 million fund. What I heard from Jeff last week was, or not last week, last week, or Monday, man, time's flying,
Goes fast.
was that there was always this timing issue for, he referred, I think he referred to as contracts, which I took as more as, we need to enter into a contract to buy a piece of equipment. Okay, is that correct? But it's not necessarily we need to enter into a contract for, I don't know, legal services. And we gotta pay $500,000 retainer. That may be an exaggeration.
Whatever.
But is that part of what Jeff was referring to last week? It could be anything. It could be a capital expenditure. It could be just normal operating expense,
he was basically talking about capital
capital.
expenditures.
Okay.
And they used the word rollover in the past.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is September, we have something budgeted, but it didn't happen.
Right.
Or we didn't get the money this year.
Mhm.
We projected certain revenue, didn't come in.
Mhm.
So they roll, and I don't even know how their accountant do that.
Well, I think
So-
it's also includes, if Jason has a contract with a private contractor, but the money is budgeted in the current year, but it's not going to be paid to the contractor until March of next year. That, to me, is what a majority of this type of stuff is for.
So it's
But
more
maybe
than
not.
just capital. It could be expenditures for something or another.
Yes, for something. that's-
Expenses, technically expenses.
Could be that dump truck that they voted on today.
Yes.
It may be January for that thing
Well,
actually gets built and delivered.
absolutely.
Okay. technically, and I may be confused, if it's in the 1.5 million, you cannot use it to hire a lawyer. But there are no rules around it.
Yeah, I was just
You can
using that
use,
as
you
an
can buy, you can
example.
use, buy a dump truck.
But
The-
if you,
the
you
version-
forget my lawyer example.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I like Kathy's example better.
Yeah,
It's not a service, it's either a good or a operating
But it could
expense,
be
in
an
my
operating expense.
Yes, it could be an expense or a capital
He's gonna
expense.
buy a bunch of chemicals.
you can't use the 1.5 million to buy chemicals. I'm making that up because there are no rules.
Yeah.
But the intent, as far as I know, is if it's not essentially in the OMT as a capital expenditure, it can't be used for that. Now, we can make up our own rules, but I'm saying, you can use it to buy a dump truck, but you can't use it to hire, hire a manager.
Right.
But
I
I
agree
think
with
it's
that.
You
primarily,
can't use it for chemicals.
well, if you ordered the chemicals and they were budgeted and approved in the budget in
Mhm.
2021, but you weren't going to pay for the chemicals because they're using multi-procurement and get
Mhm. Right.
orders over January, February, and March,
Mhm.
and they don't pay for them till then, I think it could be used for that.
Well, it could be used.
It's a
To
current
me, okay,
expense
this
paid
is-
in the future.
This is an issue of, is it there to be used simply to manage your timing issues, or is the intent to pay only things in the OMT? In my mind, it was only the second, not the first, because I like to live in a world where you separate your capital expenditures from your operating costs.
Well, but you can't do that, and again,
Oh, you can do anything you
simplistically, but
like ultimately.
you do that in the budget, but if the money isn't allocated, in the past it wasn't allocated, well, we'll roll that into, you'll spend it over January, February, March when you pay for them,
Mm-hmm.
and include it in next year's budget. Well, that was unworkable because again, it wasn't funded, it wasn't the money set aside that you were talking
Mm-hmm.
about earlier. So I think it's for, again,
Okay.
simplistically, for that purpose, as
Well,
well as for expenses that
Then
they.
that's an issue about what are or are not eligible expenses. I mean,
So,
that has,
yeah.
that's just an issue,
What's the policy definition?
which is a policy definition.
Right.
Correct.
And that is our job to come up with that definition
Right.
to give to Gary and the rest of the
To
board
either approve or
to
not.
review and approve or do whatever.
And John Paul and Kalina.
So, yeah, so in theory, we could say,
So,
if you gotta pay a large signing bonus to someone, it could come from that, if we define that. And I'm not saying we are, but that's an extreme example.
But, to get to Kathy's issue, my understanding when John Paul set it up was, let's say for the example of the dump truck, sometimes he would feel that without the 1.5 million, he felt restricted that he could not even go out to bid because he didn't even know if the money was there. Once you have the 1.5 million, he can look at it and say, I have 1.5 million to spend wisely, but at least I know when I go out to bid, and you give me a bunch of bids, and I go back to the board, and you say, we ain't giving you money. That's an embarrassment. That's a barrier to him doing his job.
Right.
For the chemical thing, that normally would come out of operating funds, and he pretty much has total control. Well, for $500,000, you still have to go to the board no matter what. But he,
I hope so.
yeah, but the operating funds, goes back to Larry's question. Where does the money come from? It comes from an operating fund, for sure. That's the only place it could possibly come from.
I really,
Where do the operating funds come from? Retained earnings, margins. That's about it.
I really think we're all getting close to the thinking the same, and we're trying to get away from budgeting big capital expenditures before we actually collected money for assessments. So we're gonna build that fund, and we start living out of our pocket instead of out of a wish.
Yeah, a lot of this really goes back to cash management, which is we do not have a view on cash management other than, and, this goes back to the old model, which is, you know, Leslie and probably pre-Leslie. Well, the thing about Leslie is under her regime, we had cash to manage. But, you know, whether it was managed the way we should have, that's another issue. But right now, incredibly, we have $8 million of operating funds. And if you know, we don't, at this time, have a really clear view on how we're going to spend it. I mean,
That's the May 26th memo. And
Uh,
the board asked for recommendations from the committee for needed policy additions or changes in the area of cash management. So that's what we asked for in May, and things sort of got snowballed.
So, I hate to say this, but did I get that memo?
You bet.
Damn. Can you send it to me? Because I'd have jumped all over that like a dog over a raw piece of steak.
I thought you did.
I may have, but it's like I said, I'd have jumped all over that one like raw meat.
When I sent
Apparently
it,
got
I
picked up by
said,
animal control and
Yeah,
it
yeah,
went to
yeah.
nothing.
Exactly. They'd have given me a rabies shot.
when I said it, I said you may include but not limit to Chapter 1, Article 6, Chapter 1, Article 8, Chapter 1, Article 10, and then after that, by a few weeks, I realized Chapter 9, Article 1, Investment Policy would also be in the mix, in the stir for that. And that, but since then, a lot of things piled up and then we're not done.
I'll talk to you about this after the meeting. But anyway, going back to your first question was, and maybe I'm oversimplifying it, it's, you know, margin earnings feed operating funds, and the operating funds feed everything else. It pays the bills, it puts money in reserves, it puts money into various funds, it puts money into restricted cash, it pays down the bond, our bond debt. You know, anything below the line that's not in the operating budget, everything's funded through operating funds. And, you know, it's basically your P&L, operating margin, operating fund, then it goes like that, it goes all over the place. And right now, the main thing that, you know, if you look at this as a cow's udder, the main thing sucking one of the cow's udders is capital.
I see, and I'm going to use my description, maybe the wrong words, but I'm going to use it as my brain describes it. I see a need for 4 funds. One, I'm going to call it the operating fund. Whatever, that's the fund that pays the bills, that's the fund that, you know, keeps the electricity coming, that's the fund for your day-to-day operation. That is how you live. I see something that, in my head, I call new capital acquisition. And to me, capital now isn't just dollars, it's assets. And that is money you have to set aside. And you have much more freedom on this. The first one, you are very restrained. I mean, you have this much it costs to operate. Capital acquisition, to me, is a combination of required. You know that at some point in time, you are going to have a new holding tank, whatever, for your water. Or you happen to think that, hey, and we did this here, we really need a fancy sign at the east gate. It can be, we have found that we cannot operate efficiently in our office area unless we get a new additional computer. It's new, almost asset acquisition. And that's one of these interesting funds because it's both something that you operate out from a frequent basis, but it's also your savings for your future needs. And so I'm calling that new capital acquisition fund. You also have what I call the reserve or the reserve replacement fund. I think we all know what I'm talking about there. And then the other fund we're looking at is this ultra long-range, ultra-conservative emergency fund. And how they all work together is kind of interesting. There are some things that you may take on that combines funds from two of them. You may have a situation that may combine some operating funds and some capital, or some capital and some replacement. And so they're not totally independent, but basically, that's how I see a financial structure working in one way or another, whether they are umbrella funds or they're little separate, the Gulf has got their own little group of these funds. And it becomes very difficult to pull them all together, and it becomes extremely difficult on how you get there, how you fund them, how much you need in each one of them, because they all have different goals and different purposes, and they interact with each other.
And I think this fund is a combination of your first two,
Which,
the operating fund and the new capital acquisition. It's a
Yeah, I think it is.
yeah,
combination.
yeah, right now, pretty much until essentially last week, or 2 weeks ago, the operating fund did everything, pretty much, except for the emergency reserve.
It did
But
the
otherwise,
reserves, it did everything.
Yeah, essentially, and I'm not sure that this will ever change. The operating fund will be the mothership, until we decide otherwise. 'cause
That's how you exist.
Yeah, I mean,
that's how you exist.
everything flows into it, and then there's a management process to allocate the operating funds to here, there, and everywhere.
I want to kind of take back or clarify, that's how you exist today.
That's how we exist today, correct.
The other funds are how you exist tomorrow.
Well,
If we ever get
Combined
that
with
far.
how you exist today, but they're your tomorrow. The other one is your today.
Mhm.
whatever you call it, that's the way it's going to be, because you're gonna set up reserves for emergency reserves, you're gonna set up capital funds, names I don't know. And then what's left is still in the big bucket, and you're gonna have to decide, what do I do with it? Where's the best place for me to put it to work until we need it?
I think the biggest challenge is how do you get it into the buckets?
Collect it first. We don't.
How do you get enough money to put it into the buckets?
You
Because
have
you have to work.
That's the $1,000,000 question.
You have
a
to
big
work
fat
from
success.
the
Actually,
operating fund.
$6.7 million question.
Yeah,
And how do you get the support to do it? Because it takes support, and it takes hard work, and it takes dedication.
That's beyond the scope of defining what the fund is. Isn't that
Right.
where we're kind of at and still
Yep.
Yeah.
taking a circular reference?
You have to define it before you can do the rest of it.
Yeah.
I
And
have
that
the
seems to
sense
be where
that-
we're making minimal progress.
Yeah, I have the sense that everybody involved right now is headed toward a goal. The goal still might be this wide, it needs to be this wide by next year, but still, I have a feeling, and we couldn't say that too many years ago, but now I think we can.
I think too many years ago, we didn't even know that there was a goal.
Yeah. Well,
That's true.
But hey, we're
Okay.
up against a hard time, aren't we? I mean,
well, we are, I'm gonna try my best to summarize things, and I think I'm gonna fail horribly because nothing's really coming to mind. In terms of, I think, we did not discuss this today, at least in emails, at least with Carl, at least he and I, rightly or wrongly, agree that we have a $1.5 million fund with no rules around it. And before the end of the year, the 1.5 million may or may not be bigger, we don't know. And the 99,000 may or not, should be bigger. I mean, that's a piddling amount. But to have those two funds, one with, let's just say 1.5 million, 1231, and the other one with, say, 500,000 or 600,000, and no rules, may, maybe we're being way too purist about it. Maybe I'm being way too purist about it. But geez, wouldn't it be nice to have rules before then, or at least sometime around then? I don't know how quickly we can burn through that issue. So the thing is, what stops us from having a set of rules around the 1.5 million? I hear one thing, nomenclature, just what we call it, just so we can discuss things without twisting ourselves in knots. The other, from what I hear, is before you can define the 1.5 million, you have to address the issue of your 5 funds. Is that correct? Not correct? Are you holding up, not to get personal, the $1.5 million rules before selling the 5 fund rule, or the 5 fund vision?
Yeah, you got.
Well, don't have to answer that.
I follow you. I mean, and it all comes to a joint understanding of what we're talking about and how the things work.
Okay.
Because right now, without the rules, we don't know what it is.
I have a pretty crappy understanding of how things work. I would be happy to sit down with you, or you, or you, or you. But I think we all have different ideas of what you are saying. So my first offer is I should sit down with you and try to understand when you say, quote, how things work, because that could be, mean almost anything.
Yeah.
Because when I listen to what you say about your background, my first reaction is, we're not perfect in virtually everything you just said, but we have made amazing progress. And I'm not saying we have it knocked out of the park or anything like that, but I think it's good enough to address the issues that you say, because you're talking about, we've got to do this and line item and budget. That's exactly what the OMP does. This committee spent days and weeks, and Gary can attest to that, poring over that one line item at a time. And it's like, we've done that. We have done that for 2022 and reasonable estimates for 2023, blah, blah, blah. So what's your next issue?
Even like I
And
said,
when you get onto your next issue, I said, I think we're doing that live. I mean, this is what we're trying to do today with the policy that we got from Jeff. So when I hear you lecturing, it's like, did it. Don't quite understand what you're trying to tell us.
and I believe a lot of what I am talking about is there in bits and pieces. I think that there's
Yeah.
been tremendous progress made since I was so
Right.
upset and saw, well, I mean,
Yeah.
we know that this place was on the verge of bankruptcy a few years ago.
Eh,
Let me
I would
rephrase.
slightly
Let me
disagree.
rephrase it. We were in dire situation.
we were running out of cash,
Yeah, we were in dire situation.
for sure.
And since then, especially recently,
Mhm,
I would say in the last 2 years,
mhm.
there's been tremendous effort that's been made here and here and here and here.
Mhm.
And there's lots of
Mhm.
pieces out there
Right.
that are there. I'm
Correct.
not sure we even the more informed of us even know all the different pieces that are out there.
Arguably, that may not be
And so,
possible. We still have to make progress.
And so I took the one statement, but
Mhm.
as I told you guys, you and Carl, there's a lot of it that's already there and is already in place.
Yeah.
We just have to understand it
Mhm.
and make the pieces fit together.
Okay, I look forward to continuing this conversation. I made a promise, and I'm gonna keep to it. I don't think, in terms of action commitments, I think the budget guidance is all on me. Gonna work on it as hard as I can. I should be able to get to it fairly quickly. One issue that I had issues with, which requires the entire committee, is I think we have meetings set up for next Monday, Wednesday. I think maybe we have one more meeting after that. We have a memo to get to the board on October 6th. So there's an issue, I think, of calendaring. And the issue with calendaring is not simply calendaring, but, you know, making sure we can get a room. Without being able to contact everybody, I probably am going to just send everybody an email saying, is that enough? Do we need to schedule more meetings? Because we don't know what it means to review the budget.
You don't know
We
what
we haven't gone through one review session. And we haven't seen the budget.
We don't know what Karina's gonna bring us, how big of a task that's gonna be.
Oh, we know how big it's gonna be. The really fun part is, if it's all electronic, yeah. I'm big on paper. I hate too much paper, but it's the only way I deal with it. But that's another issue, totally another issue. The issue is one of calendaring. We really don't know how much time we need to review the budget, get all the answers that we feel comfortable with, and then write a recommendation to the board, which could be a one-liner. It could be, we recommend, you know, adopting the budget. I was thinking of more than that, but, you know, and if it's just a one-liner, then it's just a one-liner. But, you know, Larry will be back and he typically doesn't mind tackling issues like that. I think that the three big things are budget guidance, all on me, calendaring, all on me. Do you guys have any vision on the next step? Because the next step you guys can definitely attack is, what do we call these babies so we just don't confuse the heck out of each other? Just, can you suggest a name?
A little hard to do when you don't have an idea what they're actually for, but go for it.
Well, I thought that we have an idea, at least for the 1.5 million. Do we or do we not understand or agree with, in theory, what the 1.5 million is supposed to do?
This is my basic interpretation of that.
Mhm.
I'm gonna call it this, but it may be wrong, but it's really like a savings account, short-term savings account, that
A good start.
if they need to do something today, in the past, they always had to wait until the funds were. So now we have this little savings account where we can execute things sooner than later. It's not a reserve.
Okay. I have something even more restrictive.
Okay?
We have an approved capital budget
Yep.
for 2021.
Mhm.
It is itemized, one thing at a time.
Right.
And the general manager is allowed to spend any and all funds, in theory, necessary to fulfill that within the purchasing requirements.
Right.
For him, within the purchasing requirements, that 1.5 million is fair game.
Mhm.
He can do whatever he wants to. He can spend it all down tomorrow. And, you know, I'm kind of making this up, don't get too little on this. That's my interpretation, which kind of sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah.
To me, they sound different.
Okay, with that, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn. So moved. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.